Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Last time I showed you guys how to cut out your pattern pieces from your manufacturer's pattern. All of those pieces of tissue papers are now just cut out and ready on your sewing crafting station, ready to go, and you don't know what to do with them. So I'm going to show you guys how to take these pieces of tissue to transfer them onto your fabric, following your gradient lines, your darts, your notches, all of that fun stuff. If you guys are excited for this video, give it a big old thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss another video. And without further ado, let's get to work. Okay, so for this part of your project, you're obviously going to need your fabric shears. These are different from your plain old paper shears that you cut out your pattern pieces with. Remember when I talked about this different blade? We're using the fabric shears this time. Of course, you're going to need some pins. For my project, since these are overalls, I decided to go with your classic denim overall. So this is just a kind of a cotton-based denim looking material that I'm going to go with. I had this fabric stashed away from an old yard sale, so I'm going to use up some of it today. And of course, you'll need your pattern pieces. All right, next thing you're going to need, and this part is optional, it depends on how much of an expert sewer you are. But yeah, my guess is if you're watching this video, you're still learning. But go ahead and grab those directions and remember what form of the pattern we're going to be making. So if you guys remember from my last video, we're making form C here, this romper / overalls pattern. But we have A, B, C, D. So we're going to be making form C. Going over to our instructions, they include this great little section here of cutting layouts. Based on the amount of fabric that your pattern told you on the back of how much to get of your lining and how much to get of your exterior fabric, it's gonna have a layout for you of how you should cut this out, saving your most space. So we're gonna find version C, which is actually on our next page. Such a small section compared to the last one. So they're actually calling this a romper, but I am not including the zipper in this pattern. I'm going to try and alter it to make more of an overall pattern, but these are the layouts based on the measurements they gave you. Your selvage is your raw edge. So when you have a piece of fabric, what the selvage edge is talking about, this rough raw edge right here, and then your fold is obviously your folded edge here. So when we're going over to our diagram here, it's wanting us to fold our piece of fabric with the raw edge. Our first option is for our 45-inch with or without nap. It wants our raw edge on top and our folded edge on the bottom. So matching your seams. I'm going to ignore those strings coming up here. I would fold it. So ignoring those strings up here, you'd fold it in half, matching your edges, and you now have your fold on the bottom, just like here, and you would lay out your pattern pieces as shown in the diagram. So you would do that based on which size pattern you got, whether you got 45-inch wide or 60-inch wide. So you can see here they included 4 different versions you can follow. I am not going to follow this exact version because I have more than enough fabric, so I'm not worried about wasting any. So I have my fabric laid out on the table here. Mine is still attached to the bolt, so I have like unlimited amount of fabric. I think this is 45-inch wide fabric. I haven't actually measured it, but as you can see, it's already folded in half for me. So whenever I cut on this, it's going to cut 2. So you have to keep that in mind if you're going to cut it like this. The directions on the template that it gave you wanted it folded, so it is implied that you're going to cut 2 unless specified on each fabric pattern piece, which I'll show you guys. So right now I have my fabric laid out. I have the fold up here at the top, and my selvage or my raw edge is down here at the bottom. So the time that this matters is if you have a striped fabric, kind of like this. This is actually a bed sheet that I'm using for a different project, but stripes. So I'm going to show you guys what I mean here. Okay, so I'm going to put my fold at the top and my raw edge here at the bottom. Why this matters. So when you grab your pattern piece, it's going to have something on it called a gradient line, or excuse me, a grain line. Your grain line is supposed to go parallel to your raw edge. So the same direction either up and down or side to side as your raw edge. So in this case, I'm going to go the same direction as my stripes. So like I was saying here, your grain line is going to go parallel to your raw edge here. So in this case, it's the same direction as my stripes. Why this matters, for every piece, pattern piece, regardless of what number, what direction, what size, you want your grain lines to match the same direction every single time. Because if you have a directional pattern like this and you decide to cut one sideways, you're now going to have your stripes going all different directions. So you can't just puzzle piece this in and make it fit however you need to. So now you've got your lines going diagonal and all kinds of crazy ways. They have to be exactly the same every time if you have a directional print. If you have a solid print or a pattern where it really doesn't matter what direction you go, you can put these any direction you want as long and just to get them to fit on the fabric. It really doesn't matter because you can't tell which way this is facing. So now that we have that established of which way our grain line is going to go, for case in point of this, on this pattern, I'm just going to do it parallel with the selvage edge. It's not only does it have to do with a directional fabric, it also has to do if you have a stretchy fabric or any fabric with any kind of give, so that the pattern, so that the fabric moves the same direction when you're wearing the garment. So when you have a piece of fabric that you bought from the store, you got exactly the amount that the pattern says for you to need. You got exactly 2 1/4 yards. You're gonna want to save as much space as possible. So lay out all of your pattern pieces just like it shows in your directions. Lay them all out before you cut anything. Make sure they fit, make sure you have enough fabric. I'm not doing that today because I know I have enough fabric. I have yards and yards and yards of fabric. But if you have a pre-cut piece, lay all of your pieces out first. Since I'm not going to do that today and I have plenty of fabric to spare, I like to start with my largest pattern piece. In my case, it's going to be pieces 15 and pieces 12. So you're going to go ahead and get your pattern piece and you're going to lay it face up on your pattern here. Go ahead and find your grain line and make sure it matches the direction that you need to go. In my case, it is still parallel to my raw edge, so I'm good. Now go ahead up to the top of your pattern piece by your number and read your direction. All right, so our directions are up here on underneath the pattern and number. So this is 15 pants back for form C and D. There's the same thing in Spanish. We're going to cut 2. So I need 2 pieces of these. So the fact that we're cutting on folded fabric is going to be perfect because in the end we're going to have 2 copies. So we're going to go ahead and put this down. We're going to match our grain line here. Make sure it's going the right way. You're going to have this down on your fabric. And we're going to start to pin this piece of tissue paper down to the fabric. Okay, so you guys can see I have all of my edges pinned down. Be careful when you're pinning just like little tiny, kind of like crooks and crannies like this one here, or kind of down here in the inseam of the pants, that you're just getting it all pinned down just to make your life easier when you're cutting. Now I'll mention something here that I mentioned in the last video. So if you remember, of course I pinned right on top of it. On this pattern, this line right here is my lengthen or shorten line. So if you guys remember on this pattern piece, I had my cut here for hem C where they wanted me to end the pattern for my little overall shorts. I left that long because one, I didn't know if I was going to need this pattern again for a longer piece or if this was going to be too short for me. But down here, I have this double line which you can't see because I have a pin on top of it, that says lengthen or shorten here. So what you do, if you're going to shorten your pattern piece like this, I don't want a pair of pants, I want a pair of shorts. What you do is you fold your pattern on top of that double solid line. Kind of just like that, and I just put a pin down so that I know when I cut, I'm gonna end my pant leg right here. If you're going to lengthen your pattern piece, what you would do actually is with your pair of regular scissors, you would actually cut this into 2 pieces, and you would add however many inches of fabric in between your 2 solid lines, and then you'd have your second pattern piece over here. So we're shortening, so we're going to just fold it on that double line instead, so that when I'm about to cut, it looks just like this. Here's footage of me cutting out the other piece of the pants to show you how to do that lengthen and shortening. So there is one lengthening and shortening line right here. We're going to use this one down here. And remember, we're just going to take the piece and fold it right on that double solid line right here. We're just going to fold it like that all the way across, and I'm going to pin it, shortening our pant leg there. All right, now before you go getting all Edward Scissorhands on me here, listen closely. Do not put this edge of your tissue paper pattern right on the edge of your pattern. You see how rough and crooked this is? You don't want to have that as the edge of your pattern. You ideally want a nice fresh cut. So I usually take about 5/8 away from the raw edge and cut a brand new seam. At the same time, if you're wanting to save fabric, this might get a little tricky. Just take in mind that you want a nice clean edge. See how this is all fraying and it's all just kind of wonky? You don't want that on your pattern piece. Now also when we're cutting, we're gonna start looking at things like this dart, and we have things called notches right here. I'm gonna show you guys how I cut these in my pattern pieces. There's 2 ways to do this. I'm going to show you both. Okay, so we're cutting our fabric and we have come up to this little notch right here. These 2 little triangles. This is how I cut these in my fabric. Basically, what these are for matching your seams later on when you're putting your pieces together. But what I do is I literally cut 2 triangles into my fabric. There's one. And there is number 2. So now I have these 2 little triangles on my pattern piece. Don't worry if these don't match up just perfectly. You're not going to see them later. They're going to be in your seam. And if you finish your seams on your projects, or if you fold them correctly in a hem, you're not going to see them later. They're going to disappear or get cut off. So the second way to do notches, you'll need a piece of tailor's chalk. What you're gonna do is, now that you have your piece all cut out, you're gonna take either your tailor's chalk or your fabric marker, like you may have seen in one of my previous videos, and you're gonna copy these little triangles onto your pattern. So imagining that these little notches that are not here that I cut out, you would come over here and literally just draw those notches onto your fabric. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's very, very light on my side, but that is another way you could do this. I do not do this because just the amount of time it takes me to do sewing projects and the amount of time I move things around, a lot of the time this chalk gets rubbed off and the fabric marker is set to wear off after a certain amount of time. So I do not like this method. I prefer the cutout method, but it's up to you which one you want to use. The second thing you're gonna do with your tailor's chalk are not only the notches, but you're gonna do your dart. That is this triangle piece right here. Now, everyone has to do this step at some point, whether you're doing the cutout method or the tailor's chalk method. You can choose to do this now, or you can do it when you're working with the piece later. I like to do it when I'm actually working with the piece. Just like before with the notches, you're gonna copy these little dots and lines onto your fabric. So finding our size, we cut a size 16, I believe. You would mark on your fabric the dots for size 16 and connecting them, making a triangle. That's just transferring your lines onto your fabric. You're also going to do that with our dots and circles like this one here. A good seamstress, a good sewer will tell you, copy every single line over onto your fabric before you work with it. I do not copy every single line. I only copy the ones that I'm going to work with personally. But I only do it when I'm working with the pattern. So I would set this piece aside for now, and I would come back and mark it later. It's up to you which way you want to do this. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm just piecing together my pattern pieces and seeing if they're gonna fit on this piece of scrap fabric before I just cut it off and throw it away. I can get 3 pieces on this fabric with my grain lines all matching, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut. Okay, so piecing these together, one of the things you guys might notice is that these are actually upside down. That is completely okay. As long as your grain lines are going the correct direction. So my raw edges here, and they're going the right direction parallel. So as long as they're all matching, so this one's kind of sideways, this one's backwards, this one's sideways and upside down. As long as your grain lines match, that is completely okay. So following the same process we followed earlier, cutting our notches kind of like this one right here, and either using your tailor's chalk or the cutout method, we're gonna go ahead and cut these pieces out. Hello, future Brittany here. Remember how I just told you it's okay to put it on backwards? Don't put it on backwards. If you put it backwards, like this one here, when you put them backwards, when you go to actually sew them and flip them over, you're gonna have basically the ugly side of your fabric facing out. So don't lay your pattern pieces upside down unless the blueprint in your directions says so. I had actually lucked out when I cut those pieces of fabric because luckily this denim fabric is the same on both sides. There's no really right or wrong piece of the fabric. They look the same. So I lucked out there, but if you are on a limited pre-cut piece of fabric, that would have been a waste. So don't do what I just did. Make sure you lay the pattern pieces right side up unless otherwise told on your directions. Okay, so for our last 2 pieces, I'm going to show you guys one more thing. So this is piece number 1. It is for forms A, B, C, and D. And you notice that we're going to cut one of the fabric and one of the lining. So there'll be 2 different pieces of this fabric, but of one lining and one of the exterior. The second thing here is notice place on crosswise fold for fabric A and B. So we're not doing A and B, we can ignore that one, but here we have, I'll try to turn so you can read a little bit better. Center front on fold. These little lines mean you're gonna put it on the fold of your fabric so that when we unfold it later, this is gonna be twice as large. So this is gonna be your front bodice. Notice also there's no grain line on this piece, and that's because of the cutting on the fold. For piece 2, this is actually my bodice back. This is where I'm altering my pattern. I am not going to put a zipper on this piece like the directions will originally call for. What I'm going to try to do is make this one solid piece similar to the front, just like your basic pair of overalls. So what I'm going to do is put the center back seam in grain line on the fold and double it, just like on piece 1. If you're not going to do that, Also notice here, there's 2 different grain lines, so make sure you're following either for A or C based on what piece you're making. So using those rules and those changes that we're gonna do, we're gonna cut these pieces out just like we were before. Well, that took forever and a year. But guys, the moment you've been waiting for is finally here. You can finally start working on your project. All of the nitpicky process of cutting things out is done. Now is the fun part where you get to start putting things together and sewing. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and it helped you make some sense of how to cut these pattern pieces out and actually apply it to the pattern. If you guys are interested in seeing a sew along of this project, make sure you give this video a big thumbs up so I know what content you guys want to see. Until then, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!